Okay, today I'm going to explain you how to do a forms disaster recovery on Oracle Cloud infrastructure. My primary tenant is in Paris. My standby tenant is in Frankfurt. With forms, you see, I cannot follow the steps of this document because if I do that, I will have an error. And I will explain you why. In Paris, my primary DB is here, Oracle. Database role, primary. In Frankfurt, my primary DB is here. And the database role is standby. So it's okay. If I follow the document, I will open here the standby DB in a specific mode. Okay. To do that, I will use a convert database, blah, 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 to snapshot standby. And then after that, I will install the forms VM on the DR site. And as the standby DB is open in this specific mode, snapshot standby, then it means I can connect and I can do things. But when I will come back to the initial state, it means to physical standby and not snapshot standby, all the updates I have done will be lost. Okay? The problem with the forms UC image is that when you use the forms UC image, it's very simple. You create a VM from the OCI marketplace and you have a script after that. It's automatic. You enter parameters in the script, but the problem is you do not have the choice for the moment to not create the RCU again. It means the new VM standby in Frankfurt will create the WebLogic domain on the standby DB. Okay. And the new schema created, okay, for example, the new schema is FRM2 underscore blah, blah, blah. For the first VM in Paris, the RCU schema was like FRM1 underscore blah, blah, blah. And so it means in Frankfurt, you created schema FRM2 underscore blah, blah, blah. But when you will put again the standby DB in the physical standby mode, then you will lose all the updates and you will not have the schema after the switch over. So you cannot use the steps of this document from Oracle with the forms UC image. Okay? Because this document explains how to do a DR, but there is something that is very important on the DR site. When you create a forms domain, you do not create again the RCU schema, but in this document. But with the UC image, you don't have the choice. It is a script. It will create a new RCU schema. As FRM1 already exists, the script will discover that, and the script will do, oh, okay, FRM1 exists, so I will create FRM2. And after the switch over, FRM2 is not there. Okay. So I install the first VM here, forms, you see, and during the installation processes, the VM was linked to a RCU SIM here, FRM1. I did the same with this VM forms on the DARE site, but I linked it to the primary DB in Paris. During the installation process, the user FRM2 underscore was created, and it means now I have in this primary DB two RCU schema, one for the VM forms in Paris and another for the VM forms in Frankfurt. So you can imagine after the switch over, the standby DB will become the primary DB and will have the two RCU schema, FRM1 for the VMs on the primary site and FRM2 for the VM on the standby site. And so this VM on the standby site will run perfectly. Okay? So that's the tricky point. In front of the VM in Paris, a load balancer. In front of the VM in Frankfurt, a load balancer. I can double check if it's running well. I can call here Paris. And after that, I can call DR Frankfurt. Okay, it's not finished because now the two VM are using the same DB that is in Paris. And it's a problem for the forms VM in Frankfurt. If I use VNC to connect to the VM in Paris, I can show the admin server and forms running. If I have a look here on the data sources, I follow the document here in order to do an update on the data sources to use an alias with tnsname.ora. Okay? So you follow this document, connection pool. I change here the URL to create an alias, PDB name, and I use the tnsname.ora in this directory. I did exactly the same on the forms VM in Frankfurt. Why? Because as I use an alias, then I can do a very simple update of the alias in order to be connected to the standby DB after the switchover instead of being connecting to the primary DB. Okay, so a very simple way on how to do the switchover. I will do the switchover manually, but before, because I want you to understand every steps. But you must know that I can use OCI DR, OCI Disaster Recovery. So OCI Disaster Recovery, a DR group Paris, okay, that is primary here, with members DB, primary, VM forms, primary, LB, primary. link it to a DR group in Frankfurt, standby role, okay, with DB, standby, VM, standby, LB, standby. Then I created a plan for switchover. So I can lose Paris, okay, and I can go to Frankfurt automatically. Looking at this plan, you see I run put check. All is okay to do all the steps manually. Automatically, sorry. So the step automatically, it's I do a switchover for the DB here. And so the primary will be in Frankfurt. I stop the VM here. I put the VM drain in the backend of the load balancer. I start the VM here. Okay. And the VM is already registered behind the load balancer. So the switchover will be totally automatic. And if I'm using a URL for my users, if I buy a public domain name that is using OCI DNS, I just have to do the last update and to update the IP address of the load balancer Frankfurt to put it in the OCI DNS. And it means my new public domain name will use now Frankfurt and not Paris. So it will be very nice. I don't want to use this automatic way. I don't want to click on execute the DR plan. I will do that manually in order to explain you exactly what will happen during this automatic process. Okay? So I'm going to do that, and I will come back in 2 seconds in order to show you the result. Okay, now the switchover is done. As you see, in Paris, the database role is standby now and not primary. And in Frankfurt, the database role is primary and not standby. How I do that? It's very easy. On the console of OCI, I click on Data Guard Association. Here, I see the Data Guard Association. So, primary Frankfurt and standby now in Paris. And so I want to do a switchover again. I just click on switchover. Okay. In case of Paris out and only Frankfurt is running, I will do a failover. So it's exactly the same. Okay. And not a switchover with a data guard. Okay. In Paris, instance form is stopped. Load balancer said, okay, impossible to reach the forms VM. And it's okay. In Frankfurt, VM is running now. Load balancer is running, said it's okay. But I had to update the configuration on the forms VM in order to use now the database on Frankfurt and not the database in Paris. I have VNC connection to my forms VM in Frankfurt. It's running. If I have a look to the data sources, it's the same that on the premise side. I use an alias as described in the documentation for OCI WebLogic DR on OCI. Okay. And the only update that I have done here is PDB name was renamed in PDB name prime because it's using the DB in Paris, and PDB name now is using the PDB in Frankfurt. Okay? I restarted WebLogic, and now we can check that it's okay with the DR. Forms DR, it's running. Wow, marvelous. But running using the DB now in Frankfurt. That is a primary DB. Okay. That's what I want to get as a result. I want to be able to do a manually or an automatic disaster recovery from Paris to Frankfurt. It's running well. All is okay. Remember the subtleties. I install the Forms VM in Paris, creating an RCU schema on the primary DB in Paris. I installed the Forms VM in Frankfurt using the primary DB here in Paris. Okay. Then you stop here, Forms. Okay. You update the DNS name in order to use Frankfurt. And now the Forms VM is ready to work with the DB in Frankfurt. Later, you have a problem in Paris. You do the switchover or the failover. Frankfurt is now the primary. You start the Forms VM and everything is nice because the RCU schema FRM2 is here. Okay? So, very simple, but some tricky points and some subtleties in order to really understand how a Forms domain is creating a schema in RCU and what are the consequences if you have a data guard architecture, knowing that when you have a data guard architecture, it's more complex because you can open the standby DB to create something, but you will lose all the updates. Okay? So remember the way how to do a Forms DR, and now it's simple. After understanding everything, you can use OCI Disaster Recovery, because if you have a problem now, you will exactly understand what is the problem. Okay? And it means you can use an automatic way to do that. OCI Disaster Recovery is very, very nice to do a Forms DR, but you need to understand behind the black box what happens. Okay, thank you for your attention.